I'd taken the train to run an errand, and on the way back from running that errand I was overwhelmed with anxiety about going back to my daughter and going back to my life. I didn't ever think that I wanted to kill myself. What I wanted to do was to take that anxiety away and that pain away, and I didn't know how else to do it.
I was kind of left to fend around in the dark to work out that's what I had. And then because I've never had a mental illness and probably won't have anything in the future, I didn't know where to go or what services I could access or how I could get to those services.
These two women recently had postnatal depression. They're amongst thousands.
Women are being turned away or simply not being offered any help.
And it's not just mothers who are affected.
Even today, in 2016, there's nothing on the NICE guidelines that says we need to support the fathers.
They say, that they're bringing mental health to the forefront now and they're trying to do this and they're trying to do that. They're not. They're not. It's smoke and mirrors.
In One Born Every Minute, Channel 4's documentary series, viewers have seen the magic of childbirth. But there's another side to becoming a parent, which programmes like these hardly touch upon. And because of the stigma that exists even today, it's often hard to spot. Up to 1 in 5 women in the UK suffer from some form of perinatal mental illness, mostly depression. We're looking to find out, is enough being done by society and by government for sufferers and their families? Senior Prosecutor Emma has a day off. This means lots of quality time with her 2-year-old. But not so long ago, this might have filled her with dread.
Everyone kept going, oh, don't worry, it's the baby blues. It always happens to everyone. Everyone just starts crying, and don't worry, it'll go. Except with me, it never went. It just got worse and worse and worse.
So she took herself to see her GP and was diagnosed with postnatal depression. But she feels more could have been done much earlier.
When you go to your midwife initially, they ask you the questions, any history of mental illness, anyone in your family that suffered? No, okay, that's the end of it. You then get no information at all on postnatal depression whatsoever, nothing.
After being diagnosed, months of waiting to see a specialist followed. Despite this, she was hopeful this appointment might finally offer a solution.
So I went into him and I was very tearful and I was very upset, and I was saying to him, it's all come back and I feel awful, and all the questions that, that they asked. And he simply turned around and said, yes, well, it's come back. These are the antidepressants I'm going to give you. And I was saying, but the reason for me being given the appointment here was that I didn't want to take the antidepressants, I don't get on with them. And he was like, well, that's it, that's your option, you take the antidepressants.
A survey of women with postnatal depression carried out in 2011, but still the most recent of its kind, found that of the women receiving treatment, 70% were given antidepressants and only 41% received any form of talking therapy or counselling.
I remember coming home, phoning my husband from the car and saying, there's like no hope, there's nothing. That was my last hope and the last straw I was clutching at to feel better, and there's nothing.
With no sign of a way out, Emma began to have some very dark thoughts.
Well, when it was hopeless, is I didn't want to be here anymore. I wanted to be dead, but I couldn't do anything about it, because even though that was how I was feeling, I knew I still had to be okay for Millie.
A year later, Emma recovered through private counselling paid for by her employer. But many people don't have or can't afford this luxury. Inside this building right now, there are mothers and fathers receiving support from the charity Cocoon. It is a safe and secure space for them. Unfortunately, because of that, we're not allowed to go inside and film. But the founder of the charity, Jessica Warren, has, however, granted us an interview. The charity borrows this space at weekends for counselling.
We offer free counselling services because the majority of women can't afford therapy and counselling. In London, the norm for therapy is £60 to £80 per hour. Now, as a new parent, whether you have financial backing or not, that is a phenomenal amount of money. Phenomenal.
Suicide is one of the leading causes of death in mothers in the first year after childbirth, and Jessica very nearly became another one of those tragic cases after the arrival of her second child in 2011.
I didn't ever think that I wanted to kill myself. What I wanted to do was to take that anxiety away and that pain away, and I didn't know how else to do it. I knew that I loved my family, I knew that I was their mum, but at the same time I was also overwhelmed by my family and by being a mum. And so a fog completely went over me and I started walking towards the edge of the platform when a fast train was coming. A man must have spotted me and he just kind of pulled me and asked if I was okay, and I just kind of woke up from this strange fog.
After that, her partner marched her off to see her family doctor, but her problems didn't end there.
There were no services available to me. My GP was basically all I got. I wasn't, and he very fairly said to me, you know, statistically and by Commissioner's point of view, I wasn't ill enough to access clinical services. I tried to commit suicide. I had panic attacks all day. However, I wasn't at an immediate risk. So when they asked me, do you want to kill yourself? Right now, no. I would like to hide. I'd like to run away, but I don't necessarily want to end my life right this moment. And because I couldn't say that I had intention of killing myself, I hadn't planned my suicide. I hadn't sat there thinking about how I'm going to kill myself throughout the day. So they had no services available to me.
We have a common situation with the relative lack of services for women at this time, that many women are being turned away or simply not being offered any help. And it has a knock-on effect on professionals as well, in that if you know there is no help out there, you're not going to ask the crucial questions that are going to reveal that help is needed.
The majority of women that access our care have never been, at the point of access to our service, have never ever seen a health professional. And if a health professional has been there, we've had women that have health visitors come to them and they've said, you know, I'm not feeling quite right. Oh, it's fine, it's just the baby blues. They're not educated enough. And if they are educated, if they have been given education, then there's something wrong because they're missing it.
Janet File from the Royal College of Midwives recognises that a lack of continuity of care is still a problem, but says little can be done with staffing levels as they are.
The midwives' caseload has expanded and we're about 3,000 midwives short nationally, but that does not negate the fact that we must provide care for women, be able to identify them and refer them onwards. There's obviously that can of worms. When you find somebody with a condition, who do you refer them to?
In parts of the country where charities exist, they attempt to fill some of the gaps.
We are doing the NHS's work. We are referred to by NHS health professionals because they don't have anywhere else to send them. So we are almost being subcontracted by health professionals without getting the funds to be able to provide the work, so we struggle massively.
Mothers like Jessica and Emma are victims of the postcode lottery in mental health services in this country. This is a map of current specialist community perinatal mental health care provision. If you live in the green areas, you have access to a service which meets national standards, but for the rest of the country, there is only a basic service. And in the red areas, there is no specialist provision at all. Then this year, on January the 11th, the Prime Minister announced a new multi-million-pound investment to help new and expectant mums who have poor mental health.
And I can announce today a £290 million investment by 2020, which will mean that at least 30,000 more women each year will have access to evidence-based specialist mental health care during or after pregnancy.
But what exactly does this investment mean for mothers suffering now or for mothers-to-be? We requested an interview with the minister responsible, Alistair Burt MP, but got no response. A former minister in David Cameron's government, however, did agree to talk to us.
As chair of the Working Commission for the first 1,001 days of newborn babies' lives, Conservative MP Tim Loughton meets regularly with top ministers to recommend policy changes.
Well, the government, I think, has at last acknowledged that we need to do better. One, on mental health. Two, particularly around children's mental health, but certainly around perinatal mental health and attachment. I think we are seeing solutions at last. The first solution is that it's on the radar. The second solution is the government is dedicating money.
And where exactly is that money going to go?
Well, we don't know yet, because they've earmarked the money, and they have now brought together all the appropriate groups, practitioners and others, including the 1,001 Critical Days people as well, to see where it can best be spent.
But others, like Dr. Gregoire, have heard promises like this many times before.
Well, it's a big if as to whether this money gets through to the services at all. The way the NHS is constructed is it is up to local commissioners, as they're called, of services to decide how this money is spent. So the task now is to ensure that the government's pledge that these services will happen and the government's money that has been sent to the NHS actually is spent on this very needy and neglected group of patients, and not, for example, on A&E departments. But there are many, many women, even if the money is fully spent as it is pledged, there are many women who still won't be getting the services they need. And about 80% of women who suffer from mental health problems have what we call mild to moderate mental health problems.
And there's another aspect to this promise of money which has alarmed some campaigners, like Dr. Rance from the Association of Child Psychotherapists.
One particular concern of mine is that both in terms of policy and in terms of implementation, the needs of fathers are often not sufficiently well taken into account. We know that fathers also struggle in what we would call the transition to parenthood, so it's an emotionally challenging time for most people. Becoming a parent is a complicated thing, and it's a time when difficulties from early on in our life, perhaps our own experience of being parented, can begin to resurface.
Dr. Rance is being diplomatic. When it comes to this new £290 million, there is nothing in the wording at the moment about fathers. We put this to the Minister, but again his office declined to offer a response. So we turned back to Tim Loughton. Is there anything that's coming in the policy for dads at the moment that you know of?
Well, it's not a question of here are the specifics for dads. It's a question of dads must be in the mix and part of that consideration when mum is getting the perinatal mental health support.
Right. But are they in the mix now?
No, they're not. And that's why it's a mindset thing.
Brian is perhaps an example of why they should be.
In the beginning, I was on some really heavy medication. I was knocked out practically for 6 months, just sitting on the couch. I was taking 300 milligrams of pregabalin, 80 milligrams of propanol, Seroxat, diazepam, Buspirone, and that was all in one day. I literally can't work. I'm still looking after my wife, and I'll be honest with you, my anxiety have got to a point now where I'm worn down so much after 8 years that I can get anxious if I can't turn a key in the door, and panic attacks.
After his daughter was born in 2008, his wife got severe depression.
But after 2 years, I looked at my daughter one morning, and I looked at my wife, and I suddenly realised that she just started, and I don't mean a miraculous recovery, I mean she just started to get a little bit better, and things weren't, because I mean this was constant 24 hours a day running back and forth, running around for 2 years. And I remember taking a deep breath thinking, oh, it's going all right. And the next thing I know, I was on my knees on the floor, crying my eyes out, just tears running down my face. I didn't know where I was, didn't know what was happening to me, didn't know what was going on. And the next thing I can remember is being down on the secure unit ward in Bridgend. I'd had a full breakdown.
Ever since, he's had regular hemiplegic migraines, which are like mini strokes.
I've suffered with stress since I was 22. I found my father after he killed himself. I found him. But I managed to work and everything with that. Now, the stress, depression, that bring on these migraines and different things, I haven't got any quality of life because they can come on any time, I can do anything, and all of a sudden, boom, I'm gone.
How did you manage?
By the grace of God. It is the hardest thing I have ever done. As a physical person, I'm pretty tough, I don't mind. But that, looking after my wife and daughter for 2 years, it nearly finished me.
But Brian has a history of depression and anxiety, so could he be classed as having postnatal depression? Dr. Paul Ramchandani of Imperial College London is one of the leading authorities in this field.
Men can get depressed at that time, so men can be depressed in the postnatal period, the same as women can be depressed in the postnatal period. And as I say, my view, reading the evidence that there is around that, there's very little evidence that depression at that time is different in any special way in terms of a condition from depression at other times.
Didn't they say that about women? When they suffer from postnatal depression, oh, just chin up, oh, you'll get over it, there's worse people than you. So men and women, although, completely different species, we do go through the same emotions. And postnatal depression is an emotional issue as well. We understand that there's hormonal changes in a woman, but it is such a life-changing thing going through a childbirth. It's traumatic.
Up to 10% of men get depression or anxiety in their child's first year, and up to 50% of fathers suffer from depression if their partners do. In spite of the numbers, there are very few dads out there looking to raise awareness. One exception to that rule is a man who travels the world speaking at events like this Perinatal Mental Health Conference in London. His name is Mark Williams. Mark's been campaigning for the last 5 years. He's paid for this through some donations, but mainly out of his own pocket.
Remember, loads of people have said how can men get depression postnatal, and like I said, there's a lot of fathers who actually got mental health illnesses before they become a father. Anxiety kicks in, the stress levels. And it just goes to show that even today, in 2016, there's nothing on the NICE guidelines that says we need to support the fathers. We support the mother with mothers who's got a previous of mental health illnesses, but why ain't the dads monitored too? And this is why I'm campaigning.
When was it you first realised you had postnatal depression?
Well, I didn't realise until actually 2011-12. I wasn't officially diagnosed with postnatal depression at the time because I actually suffered in silence for about 6 years.
Many would argue that men can't get postnatal depression since they don't go through the same hormonal changes as women.
The evidence that postnatal depression is due to physiological changes or hormonal changes isn't very strong. the majority of women will get quite significant mood changes in the few days after the birth of their child, what people call the blues. That's around about 4 to 5 days, where their mood will drop suddenly, which is very clearly related to hormonal change following the birth of the child. But in terms of depression going on beyond that, it's not so clear that that's necessarily due to hormones. It's a common belief, but the evidence that that's the case is quite weak.
Mark feels another area is overlooked: post-traumatic stress disorder in fathers from the birth. He thinks he suffered from this after witnessing his wife have an emergency C-section. Now, even the smell of hospitals makes him shaky.
A lot of fathers feel helplessness. They can't. As a man, we want to protect the wife. We want to make sure she's well. The father is actually sometimes witnessing more than the mother because she's actually out cold. You know what I mean? You know, you can imagine all the medics running around and trying to save the baby and trying to save it. It's a traumatic experience. And we got to understand, we know about PTSD in the army, but remember now, these men are actually, you know, look watching their loved ones going through all this stress and they're looking after the child, you know.
I know fathers I've worked with who have been traumatised by attending the birth of a baby, which has been very complex, and even an ordinary birth, just to witness their wife or partner in physical distress, feeling very helpless, being on the sidelines of that.
But there was no time for Mark to address his own issues. He had to care for his wife, who had depression.
For men, I was never asked once by anyone how I was feeling. He was drinking constantly at the time, especially when my mother-in-law came down, because obviously my mind was racing. I remember punching a sofa and breaking my hand a year. Never hit anything apart from what my sport, my children's sport. I remember trying to pick fights with bouncers. I was a totally different person, and because I couldn't tell my friends thought, oh, who's this guy now? You know, totally different person I had previously. And I was 30 years of age. And I didn't know nothing about mental health. I didn't know.
But we discovered it's not just Mark who feels excluded.
When it comes to perinatal mental health, men aren't looked at all. If the person that you love has mental health issues, that's going to affect your mental health in some way or another. You're not going to sit back and go, oh, okay, it's fine, it's great. That is going to have an impact. And if it has an impact on that man, the impact on that man is going to then have an impact on that woman's recovery. The men sometimes are the caregiver for that woman. They have to leave work. If the mum can't function, they have to function for them. If they can't look after their baby, the dad has to step in and look after the baby.
They are part of the solution. Too often they're seen to be perhaps rather inconvenient part of the problem. And too often, frankly, midwives and other clinicians, when you're going through pregnancy or even when you're giving birth, seem to be talking over the heads of dads just to the women, and yet dads need to be part of that equation, and in some cases they have felt a bit squeezed out.
The National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, also known as NICE, has chapters of guidelines for NHS staff about mothers with depression, but nothing about fathers. This means that ordinary NHS staff fulfilling their duties are not advised to screen fathers for depression. We contacted NICE to ask them why. They responded saying that
the guideline for antenatal and postnatal mental health does not include recommendations about fathers. The Department of Health refers topics onto us. From then, NICE defines the scope of what should be included in that guideline.
We put this to the Department of Health, but they declined to comment. When Mark's not campaigning, he mentors young people and volunteers at the local youth club, which he attended as a boy. And it's how perinatal depression affects children which most concerns some experts. Studies have shown that it can cause behavioural problems, delayed cognitive development, and insecure attachment. And another found that the effects of the illness on children cost the NHS an extra £5 billion a year.
If our most important part of our environment as a baby, our mums and our parents, are not functioning well, that has an impact on our learning, about life.
Everyone talks about it, but they have to prove it, that we really want the next generation to be healthy, both physically and mentally.
We spend something like £2,800 per woman for physical health care in maternity. We spend well under £50 per woman on mental health care in maternity.
It's set up to make it as difficult as possible for the most vulnerable people in this country to get what they're right for, what they deserve, what they should be getting, care.
I just think that there is work to be done there, and there was clearly, I was clearly missed in terms of what could have been done.
And would you ever have another child?
I wouldn't, because it was so bad that I just don't think I could go through that again.
There's clearly much more awareness and at least a promise of more money for some sufferers of perinatal depression. But there are many parents out there still not receiving sufficient support from current services. And if we want to be offering all children the best start in life, is that good enough?